Good morning. I'm Jim Perkins, and I welcome you to Season 3, Spring 2014 of the OLLI program series, Foreign Cultures and American Foreign Policy. I'd like to thank and acknowledge Professor Alan Lynch of the Woodrow Wilson Department of Politics of UVA, who's not here, he's overseas today, but he has been helping me inspire and suggest lecturers for our program, who are really the superstars in their respective fields. The objective of this OLLI program is to inform participants about foreign cultures and how they affect those countries' behaviors, and how that knowledge can create an enlightened American foreign policy. Dr. R.K. Ramazani, who helped me create this program back in 2011, recently wrote an article published in the Daily Progress on March 9, 2014. The article was titled, "Obama's Jeffersonian Approach." In it, Dr. Ramazani stated, and I'm going to quote parts of that, "President George W. Bush persistently invoked the primacy of the goal of globalization of democracy as the centerpiece of American foreign policy. In his inaugural address in 2005, he said that it was the United States policy to seek and support democratic movements and institutions in every nation and culture with the ultimate goal of eliminating tyranny in the world. All major American presidents have attempted to apply Jefferson's principles to U.S. foreign policy. In 1859, Abraham Lincoln praised Jefferson for having planted an abstract truth applicable to all mankind. In 1916, Woodrow Wilson admired Jefferson for concerned action for the American example everywhere in the world. And in 1943, Franklin D. Roosevelt designated Jefferson as the apostle of freedom everywhere. Now in 2008, Bush said, quote, "Our world echoes with Jeffersonian principles," but he departed from Jefferson and his other presidential predecessors by advocating the establishment of democracy in other nations by forceful means. Obama has followed Jeffersonian principles in pronouncing the primacy of an American example, not the intending that democratization be an instrument of American foreign policy. He, Jefferson, wrote in 1801 that a just and solid Republican government maintained here will be a standing monument and example for the aim of imitation of the people of other countries. Understanding the difficulties of moving from tyranny to democracy, he told Lafayette in 1790 not to expect transition from despotism to liberty in a feather bed. Jefferson's belief in the primacy of the American example had an impact on practice. He believed that the people must be prepared to receive democratic values on their own initiative and in their own time. Jefferson realized after the Louisiana Purchase, for example, that the new state was not ready for democracy, as it had no public education and its political culture had been so imbued with Spanish feudalism and Roman Catholicism that its people would not be able to contemplate individual rights and the rule of law, let alone accept such modern values and abide by them in action. The American example is the principle that Obama has chosen. This means that we must perceive the multiple elements in every society, consider the conditions, and plan accordingly. In other words, he emphasizes the essential ingredients of every culture, whether in the Syrian crisis or today in the Ukrainian upheaval. Former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright said it well on November 30th, 2000. Cultural factors are utterly inseparable from foreign policy, and the more we know and understand about the cultures of those with whom we interact, the more successful our policy will be. This ends Ramazani's article quotation, but it is with these principles in mind that we present these talks in this program, Foreign Cultures and American Foreign Policy. This brings us to today's subject country, Pakistan, and our guest who will tell us about Pakistan's culture. Our guest today is Professor Richard Barnett. Rich is an associate professor in the history department at the University of Virginia. He came to Virginia in a UVA in 1964 as an acting assistant professor. He was teaching a 3x3 load and working on his PhD all at the same time from UC Berkeley, which he then obtained in 1975. His expertise is in the medieval and early modern South Asia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh. His first book, Rethinking Early Modern India, concerns state formation and regional culture in North India during the 18th century, after the Mughal Empire fell apart and before British hegemony was established and intended to the island areas. His second book, North India Between Empires, Awadh and Mughals and the British, from 1720 to 1801. It has an American edition, an Indian edition published in Delhi, and a Pakistani edition published in Lahore. Rich is currently working on his third book, South India Between Empires. In the spring 2010, Rich was part of the faculty on Semester at Sea, and it was an around-the-world trip visiting 14 ports in 10 different countries. His current interests take him to the Middle East, where his daughter and her husband and family live in Saudi Arabia, where Rich has visited several times. We are privileged to have, and please give a warm welcome to, the only college president in North America teaching the history of Pakistan, Professor Richard Barnett. Rich?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Khawateen o Hazrat, I'm not going to give this entire talk in Urdu, but I'll switch to English. Thank you, Jim, for that very fulsome introduction. I realize that there is a very great deal of intellectual heft and power in this room right now. I know that you bring with you an insatiable curiosity to keep on learning, to keep on experiencing not just your own society in its fullness, but also the cultures of the non-West. And I am here to participate in that operation. Does this thing shake out a little bit? Yep. Thank you. Wonderful. There is no glamour in being nearsighted. The music you were listening to was the ensemble of Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. He went to his heavenly reward about 7 years ago, but during his life, he was the paragon of Sufi musical production, otherwise known as OLLI. And had you seen him in the video that accompanies the music, you would have recognized a very large man who was perhaps the most loved qawwal, or the singer of mystical music, in the world. He sang several soundtracks for Hollywood films, including Dead Man Walking, and if I'm not mistaken, either Salaam Bombay or Slumdog Millionaire. So his voice is more famous than his face, but Pakistanis worshipped him, more or less, even though it's very anti-Islamic to worship anything other than God. But my point in asking you to listen to this for a few minutes is one that I would want to make before I say anything else about Pakistan. And that is that Pakistan is a very threatened nation right now. And I will go into some detail about that. But I'll hope to leave time for some very high-octane questions from y'all. What is going to stop Islamic fundamentalism from turning Pakistan into another 90s Afghanistan, in which women have no rights, in which girls' schools are bombed, in which music and cinema are all forbidden, is not secularism. It's not something that the United States can do. It's not parliamentary democracy. It is not the infliction on Pakistan of the major American religion, which is not Christianity, it's capitalism. The thing that's going to stop it is Pakistani popular culture. The thing that's going to stop it is what I call everyday Islam. OLLI is the quintessential expression of everyday Islam. And if you log on to the URL that I'm sure Jim has provided you with, that shows you the video of this one piece, which is about 13 minutes long, and these sessions go on all night. By 4 o'clock in the morning, I guarantee you, you will be in a different spiritual state. And that's the whole point. That if you see the video, the lyrics accompany the video, and it is very powerful stuff. At the end of my remarks, I will recite some Sufi poetry to you in Persian and Urdu. You might want to know what this is. This is Pakistani national dress. It's called a shalwar suit, and it is ubiquitous. All ethnic groups will wear this, the males, but it was first invented by Pashto speakers from the Northwest. I got this particular one in Karachi, and accompanying it is what is called either the Chitrali cap by English speakers or the pakul by Pashto speakers. Because it is scratchy, I am going to ask your permission to remove it for the rest of my remarks. You can get these on the roadside all over Pakistan for probably $3. And they're handmade and they're wool. The wool part is wonderful because it keeps your head warm in winter. This is known technically in Urdu as vest. So let me tell you a bit about Pakistan and show you some pictures. The novelty of the place is time-consuming and eternal because one wants to take it all in. The noises of the morning involve the jumble roar of 200 muezzins giving the 5:25 a.m. call to prayer, depending on the season, the time changes, highly amplified at the same time from all directions. And the call to prayer in the morning contains the Arabic phrase, prayer is better than sleep. The sound of 5,000 crows eating breakfast in the trees of the neighborhood and the park, the horns, the squealing tires, the muffled traffic sounds, the hawkers opening up their days for business, the sounds of scooters, lorries, buses, and cars, the laughter of children and the muffled footfalls of joggers in the park, and the telltale scrapings of furniture downstairs as the cook sets the table for breakfast. Outside, in the lazy morning, there are wild monkeys, screaming and diving parrots, buffaloes, and camels. The food, the hospitality, the welcoming outlook, even amidst suspicion and fear. Put a bookmark right there. We'll come back to this. But I know that you're interested in why there is such a place as Pakistan and the configurations of its hopes, fears, ecstasies, traumas, and achievements, in spite of everything. I will start by making some excruciatingly general remarks about the historical background. Muslims came to South Asia not in order to spread Islam. That was the last thing on their minds. They wanted to take advantage of its resources. They wanted to plunder the central banks of South Asia, by which I mean Hindu temples and Buddhist monasteries, which is where the surplus wealth of the country had been being kept for centuries with no one guarding them, and take them back across the Khyber Pass to recruit armies to kill other Muslims. If anyone tells you, and there is a very great deal of brainwashing in India going on right now, that the Muslims were hell-bent to convert everyone with a Quran in one hand and a sword in the other, tell them to go fish. This is wrong. But it is one of the foundation platforms of the Hindu revivalist movement going on in India right now, and in the few weeks ahead of us, the Bharatiya Jana Sangh, the Hindu right party, will probably win an outright majority in the parliamentary elections. That will make things very difficult for Pakistan, as if they weren't already difficult. I'm going to compress this because I have a sense of mercy. The people who finally established control of North India and then slowly Central India, Eastern India, and much of Southern India were ethnic Turks. They migrated across the northwestern passes from Central Asia, rather much like the Aryans had done between 1500 and 500 BCE. They formed with their descendants a loosely defined high-status class called Ashraf. Ashraf is related to the Arabic word sharif, which means noble. It is related to our word, sheriff, as in sheriff of Albemarle County. But a lot of their genetic material was diluted because they fell in love with India and they fell in love with Indians, and so they intermarried. If you look carefully at the portraits of the rulers of India from the 13th century until the 19th century, they get progressively more Indian looking. Shah Jahan, the builder of the Taj Mahal, was 75% Rajput, which is to say the indigenous population of Western India, because his dad and his granddad and his great-granddad had all intermarried into India. There's a lot not to love in India, but the women are loved. But the majority of Muslims in South Asia are converts or descendants of converts of either Hindu or Buddhist social or professional groups and laboring masses. Their conversion was voluntary, not coerced. It was a question of being at the feet of Sufi saints who were miracle workers, who were holy men. India was used to holy men. This was the latest overlayment of holy men to come to India. And much of them came to India because as a religious minority from Central Asia and the Middle Eastern empires, they were persecuted by more strict Muslims. So they came with a cosmopolitan attitude. And the result is South Asian Sufism, which is a marvel in itself. So the non-governing classes, the non-powerful classes, were not called ashraf. They were called ajlaf, commoners. They did not own land. They did not perform government service. They did not claim foreign ancestry. They did not speak Persian. Persian was the language of South Asia for 700 years, the lingua franca, the government official language. Why? Because it transcended regional language differences in North India, all the way from Pashto in the northwest to Bengali in the southeast. In their lives, there is much that reflects the myriad practices of Buddhism and Hinduism. Strict Islamists go crazy about that. Today, the most obvious characteristic of South Asian Muslims, and I include those in India and Bangladesh, is diversity. There are Muslim communities scattered all over India whose languages are mutually unintelligible. In other words, Muslims in South Asia do not form a nation. There are too many differences among them. Before the politicization, mobilization, and prospect of one man, one vote democracy that occurred during the last century and the last decades in British rule, there was no real, lasting, collective hostility between Islam or Muslims and non-Muslims. That is a product of modernity. That is a product of the threat from democracy, the threat from imperialism. I can explain that further in the Q&A. The Ashraf elite, located mostly in the Gangetic Plains, North India from Delhi to Benares, were the moving force behind the idea of Pakistan. They championed Urdu. So Urdu became the national language of Pakistan. You can test your friends around the beer keg next time you have a party to find out if they know what the percentage of modern-day Pakistanis speaks Urdu at home. It's 4%. So it is the national language because it too transcends the regional languages of Pakistan, which are Punjabi, Sindhi, Pashto, Saraiki, and Baluchi. What was the bedrock of the Pakistan movement? It was this fear, articulated very well by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Qaid-e-Azam, the father of the nation. By the way, the title Qaid-e-Azam was given to him, the great leader, Qaid-e-Azam, that title was given to him by Mahatma Gandhi. It was the fear that Muslims would not be taken care of unless their rulers were not committed to their protection. And the Indian National Congress had policies that were direct threats to the Muslims of South Asia. There was a lot of unity between the faiths during the Caliphate movement of 1916 to 1920, which was designed to get all Muslims of South Asia and their allies, most of whom are non-Muslims, to support the Caliphate, which was threatened after the end of World War I. It lasted for a while in Turkey, and then Mustafa Kemal Ataturk abolished the Caliphate. The Caliphate movement was a wonderful idea because it overcame communal hatreds for a while, but then those who followed it were all dressed up and left with nowhere to go. There was no caliph to support. But so the Indian National Congress plunged into symbolic, ethnic, political-based nationalism. They chose as a temporary national anthem the song by Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, a Bengal Brahmin, his Bande Mataram, I am the slave of the mother being the country, but also the mother being Parvati or Devi or Shakti, a Hindu goddess triumvirate. This author was also known widely to have written major novels championing the wholesale slaughter of Muslims. So, if you ask me, was Pakistan necessary in the long run? I would say yes. It's a tragedy. Partition was a gory disaster, a catastrophe for South Asia. It wasn't so much a pogrom because the governments didn't support it, but it was a slaughter. It was kind of South Asia's worst moment. This element of Hindu communalism is now poised to take over India. Turning now to the situation in just Pakistan. We've compressed 1,500 years of South Asian history in a few generalizations. You're welcome. The issue occupying center stage right now is Islamization, which is usually posed in the question, should Pakistan remain a Muslim homeland or become a truly Islamic state? I will try to present the essentials of this very complicated question in brief and comprehensive form. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Qaid-e-Azam, wanted Pakistan to be a pluralist, secular state. There is absolutely no debate about this. But his career has been hijacked by the fundamentalists in Pakistan. They claim things for him that he never said and never believed. He was a heavily drinking, cigarette smoking and pipe smoking and cigar smoking, bespoke suit wearing aristocrat from Bombay, now called Mumbai. He married a beautiful Parsi woman who had to convert to Islam. And his career took him away from her to the place where she slowly developed clinical depression and died without him even being there. A very sad story, but he didn't even marry a Muslim woman. And now he's considered to be the father of an Islamic nation. There are ironies plenty in South Asian history. Jinnah died, however, in early 1948. He could not rule Pakistan. He was dying of lung cancer or TB or a combination of both, having chain-smoked his way through his whole adult career. And his doctor was a Bombay Hindu who kept it a secret from everybody because of patient-doctor confidentiality. A true professional. It was a surprise to most people when he died. And what happens after that? The leadership of a charismatic father of the country is gone. And you have only sycophants. You have only people who are interested in their own well-being. You have people who are using the country to benefit party rather than the other way around. We have that problem here. There are elements of secular pluralistic governance during the eras of two of Muhammad Ali Jinnah's successors. Ayub Khan, the capitalist military man, and the quasi-socialist, Berkeley-educated Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in the early 60s and 70s, respectively. But there are contrary forces and contrary factors involved in the Islamization of Pakistan. Number one, the loss of 3 wars with India. India is the bully in the neighborhood, and India will never lose to Pakistan. It is many times larger. Its military budget is smaller as a percentage of GDP, but its military budget is many times larger than Pakistan's military budget, and everybody knows that. You also have the value of connection with oil-rich regimes in the Middle East, economies in the Persian Gulf. You also have the identity crisis resulting from the Bangladesh War of 1971, in which half the country and more than half the population were just gone, lost. Why did that happen? Because the Punjabis who controlled West Pakistan used Bangladesh as a colony for raw materials, but they never really ramped up any kind of recruitment for the civil service, the university professorships, the legal system, the military, or other appointments in Western Pakistan. Finally, you have the growing influence of the fundamentalist Jamaat-e-Islam under Maulana Abul Ala Maududi, who had originally been against the creation of Pakistan altogether. He said, no, state formation gets in the way of your relationship with God. Only God rules. Mankind cannot rule. He changed his mind and went to Pakistan and produced a party that's really determined to overthrow the democracy of the legacy of Bhutto and Ayub Khan and now Musharraf a little bit, and the civil society, and we're still awaiting the outcome of that. How much detail do you want about the intervening policies of Pakistan? Probably not that much. But something happened during the prime ministership of Prime Minister Zia-ul Haq. Zia-ul Haq promulgated a coup against Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, the Berkeley socialist, in 1977. And he was a military man who had a personal piety rating of 500,000. And he he continued Bhutto's defensive Islamization. Every chief executive of Pakistan in trouble has always gone the Islamization route in order to save his derriere. And in Bhutto's case, it was completely regarded as hypocritical and desperate, which it was. What did Bhutto do? He changed the weekly holiday from Sunday to Friday. He outlawed horse racing. I lived twice on Fulbright fellowships on the street called Race View, which is right next to the Lahore racetrack. There are still horses there, but there's no racetrack. It's a public park. The horses are there for polo, which we did see from time to time. He also prohibited alcoholic beverages for Muslims. I am not a Muslim. Whoops, I better not lean on this. And I'm sober. I am not a Muslim. I had access to one case of Heineken, that was the only brand they had, and one bottle of hard liquor per month. I was very popular among my Muslim friends. Trust me on this. I had to fight them off. So Zia continued this and made the zakat pillar of Islam. There are 5 pillars of Islam. One of them is zakat. You give alms. And the alm rate is 2.5%, not of your income, but of your assets every year. But for 1,500 years, this has been a relationship between you and your individual conscience and Allah Mian, okay? Mr. God. And you respond according to your level of piety and your level of commitment to your fellow human beings. What did Zia do? He made it compulsory. Everybody has to submit detailed records of their assets every year, and 2.5% has to go to the state. How Islamic is that? Not very. The Quran does not legitimize that. But he thought it would be a really good idea. Now, there's a lot of corruption in the zakat system, but the zakat system does succeed in the sense that it provides a safety net which does not exist in India, it does not exist in Bangladesh. He also changed the penal law code to include Islamic punishments from the 7th century, including amputations. Were they carried out? No, because you can't recruit a doctor to cut off somebody's foot. No doctor worth her or his career is going to amputate a hand because it was going to be done surgically under anesthesia. No, if you want a punishment, make it public, use an axe. But civil society would not allow that. Keep in mind that Pakistan still has a civil society. It's threatened, it's on the ropes, it may lose, but it's still alive. He also instituted dress codes. Women had to cover up. He also eliminated women's sports. He also carefully regulated women's appearance on television. These things continued. He also laid the foundation for persecution of Islamic minorities, including the Ahmadis, including the Shiites. And the Taliban have carried this to an extreme in which Shiite mosques and processions are routinely bombed by suicide bombers, and Ahmadis are hounded and sometimes assassinated just because of who they are. A few words about the Taliban. And then I want to talk positively about a lot of different wonderful things. The Taliban were created by the United States of America in order to fight the Russians in the 80s across the border in Afghanistan. Tens of thousands of young men, old men, volunteers, but mainly graduates from the 20,000 madrasas that the CIA and the Saudis paid to open up along the boundary of Pakistan and Afghanistan. Those madrasas are still there. Some of them are completely legitimate, but most of them are simply mass factories for suicide bombers, jihadis, and Islamists. They study the Quran, they study selected cherry-picked phrases from the Quran, they study Hadith. You can find videos online of the graduation ceremonies for some of these students. How many per month? About 20,000. There is no way that drones can kill them all. There is no way that the Pakistan military can kill them all. They are coming into Pakistani and Afghan society as a flood, as a tsunami of willingly suicidal terrorists. We created that. There is nothing that we can do to stop it. The Pakistanis have to shut down these madrasas, or they have to change the curriculum, which right now produces a lot of brainwashed jihadis. Without that happening, civil society in Pakistan is doomed. If civil society in Pakistan is doomed, and the Taliban take over the government, they will have access to about 125 nuclear bombs. And it's only a matter of time before 1 or 5 or 20 of these make it across the border between the United States and Canada, or the United States and Mexico, or the West Coast or the East Coast, and detonate in places like Charlottesville. Why Charlottesville? Because it is symbolic. It's extremely symbolic in the foundation of the United States and its values. That might be their first target. If I were Taliban, I'd say, hey, forget New York. We've already attacked them. They're already terrified of us. Attack Charlottesville. So I'm not putting an artificial scare in front of you. I'm laying out the stakes in making sure that we understand that the so-called global war on terror is not going to be won or lost in Afghanistan. It's going to be won or lost in Pakistan. We cannot tell the Pakistanis what to do. I teach a course which in its founding was called Pakistan Islamic Frontier. I want to talk a little bit about the reasons why. Pakistan is in many ways a wonderful country, one in which I have lived with my family as a welcome visitor many times. I personally have driven my family and others all over the landscape without a bodyguard, without an interpreter. Pakistan was created in 1947 as an ungovernable separation of majority Muslim territories from Hindu-majority India. It was created as a homeland and a safe harbor for Muslims. It was not created as an Islamic state. There is no state in history that is an Islamic state. You can go back 1,700 years. You can think about Saudi Arabia. No, Saudi Arabia is run as a Dept by the Saudi family. My daughter lives there, I know. Yemen? No. Iran? No. Why? Because the Sharia law doesn't say very much about statecraft. The Quran says almost nothing about how to be a ruler. It says a very great deal about how to be a perfect human being. It says a very great deal about how to treat society. It says a wonderful amount about family, mosque, and marketplace, fair trade. Muslims will not cheat you if they are really good Muslims. They will not adulterate medicines like they do routinely across the border in India. Why? Because the Quran is right there in front of their faces, saying, dude, don't do this. It's wrong. You are being watched. So, what the Taliban are after is impossible. It is a divinely inspired utopia managed and directed by a perfect human being called the Insani Adil, the perfectly just man. Morally upright, perfectly educated, wonderfully connected with Allah. And his minions are the enforcers who will not tolerate deviance. The model, next door in Afghanistan, lasted until 2001. and won when the United States invaded and drove out the Taliban. They just went over the border to Pakistan and sat there. Pakistan government said, fine, we'll treat you very well because we need you down the road. Pakistan is actively managing the Taliban right now. And they're waiting in case they need them to fight in Kashmir or to fight on the border with India or to somehow continue to destabilize Afghanistan so that it does not become an Indian client state. It's already happened that it has not become an American client state. We have no idea what we're doing there. The U.S. military are valiant with a sense of great honor, but they hate that war. I have relatives who have served in Afghanistan, relatives who have served in Iraq. Iraq was a war that was designed to ruin our efforts in Afghanistan. It was like a dog looking at a squirrel and chasing the squirrel instead of the prey. And we based that war on 5 lies, and we still believe those lies because we haven't jailed anybody who was responsible for the war, and they're still writing their memoirs and justifying it. So in 1971, Bangladesh, with India's help, burst into being after a civil war, lopping off East Pakistan and most of the population from Pakistan. Since people finally got so fed up with the Punjabi exploitation of Bengali speakers that they rose in revolt. And well late into that civil war, India stepped in. Pakistan today is where the so-called global war on terror will be won or lost. It has been governed by generals for almost as many years as it has been misgoverned by civilian politicians. And there are few countries in the world that have been distressed and battered as much by outside historical forces as Pakistan. Pakistan is a victim of world history. They have allowed it. But nevertheless, directly related to our concern about Islamism, that was for punctuation, about Islamist violence is the result, thank you very much indeed, is the result of a survey. Let's see here. That's the topography of the zone between Pakistan and Afghanistan. There are 80 passes, not just the 3 main ones. Okay? The Khyber Pass you can walk across. It's the same elevation and roughly the same topography as Rockfish Gap, where I-64 crosses 250. It's about the same elevation. It's no big deal. It's a stroll in the park. You can bring grandma. She'll be happy. Oh, look at the mountains. Oh, good. The other passes are much more challenging, but during the so-called Mujahideen War in the 80s, thousands and thousands of Afghans and thousands of Pakistanis carried rockets, bullets, machine guns, refrigerators, and huge containers full of heroin back and forth across that border. The heroin smuggling is no longer going on human backs, it's going on big lorries that come right straight through Pakistani customs because the Pakistanis are benefiting tremendously from it. If we would take the needle out of our arm, it wouldn't exist. But we cooperate too. In the Manchester Guardian, it's reported that deaths from terrorist acts increased 48% from 2008 to 2009, just to take one random year. Violent deaths generally reached 12,600, more than 14 times the total in 2006. This is 6 times more civilian casualties from terrorism in Pakistan than from the war in Afghanistan. And the Gallup poll reports that 80% of Pakistanis feel unsafe in public. No kidding. There is a London School of Economics study that said after the US invasion of Afghanistan, only 43% of Pakistanis agreed that bombing and other attacks intentionally aimed at civilians are never justified. This figure, after hundreds of Islamist attacks on fellow Pakistanis, has risen to 90%. 90% of Pakistanis hate terrorism that affects civilians. Okay, put a bookmark. By contrast, Only 46% of Americans say that such attacks are never justified. That's fewer than well, we want. 24% of Americans say openly that such attacks are often or sometimes justified. In other words, Pakistan is in the middle of the action and it doesn't like it. But because of the ineffectual nature of the Pakistani government, because of the low salaries of the police, because of the low salaries of the army, because of the ineffectual policies that drive the ISI, the intelligence apparatus of the Pakistani government, to collaborate with the Taliban, including in Pakistan, where they fully arranged the bombing of the Indian embassy in Kabul several years back. Without that changing, the insurgency will continue. Most Pakistanis, while hating what the US does in the world, at the same time cannot abide the Islamist parties. These parties spawned terrorist groups galore over the last 3 decades. The US, in its war against the Russians in Afghanistan, used Islamic piety and the narrow ideology of jihad to dish our main enemy, but in process directly created the Taliban. It was Charlie Wilson's war. You've probably seen that movie. It's accurate. Afghan and Western Pakistani Islamists, plus a few thousand violent extremists from the rest of the Muslim world, fresh from a heady defeat of the powerful army of the USSR, then provided a welcome feathered nest for Al-Qaeda and its deadly agenda. What I guess I'm getting at, and I'm condensing here because I have a watch, is that we Americans have made quite a mess with our various wild swings of foreign and military policy. We don't seem to understand under our new president that resistance to Western intervention and the somewhat reluctant Pakistani military support in the past year has become a war of Pashtuns who seek revenge rather than a war of Islamism. That's just to take one facet of this whole mess. Pashto-speaking Pashtuns have a deeply ingrained ethos, not only of hospitality, not only of providing refuge to anyone who seeks it in their home, even if that person is a convicted criminal or fleeing authority, but they have what is called badal. Badal means exchange. It means an eye for an eye. It means revenge. So many tens of thousands of people have been killed by drones that their relatives, their surviving relatives, are going to make sure that Pakistan pays, the United States pays, NATO pays, by any means necessary. And every household in Pakistan has an AK-47. And the bullets are made locally. You don't have to import them. Let's try to see all of these events through Pakistani eyes. I try to have this happen in a class I teach. And perhaps the best way of doing this would be to talk about this class so that you get an idea of what's being passed on to millennials on your behalf and at your behest. What major themes, enigmas, paradoxes, and understandings are emphasized in this class? It's the academic's task to raise the level of cultural sophistication and appreciation of a varied world as we move through our overworked and underpaid careers. Also, any answer to this question, I don't try to dodge this reality. How you handle any topic at the university level, including science, is a function of your own theoretical, political, linguistic, and experiential background. You are not a perfectly educated robot. You have responded to over time, different stimuli, different distresses of our society and what you perceive in the societies you teach about. Each new term, we therefore plunge into a thicket, into a wave pool of Pakistan's historical issues, which change every year, and I teach this class every year. Tailored for a U.S. undergraduate clientage desperate to escape the mainstream media narrative. The course's title, until recently, when I changed it to include Afghanistan, was Pakistan Islamic Frontier. Here's where we get into the nitty-gritty, and then I'm going to slow down and stop. On the surface, this title might possibly refer to communal and sectarian confrontation, or geopolitical conflict with India, or the complicity of the army and intelligence agencies with the religious right, or ineffectual regimes flailing about in policies they don't understand, which come and go, electoral cynicism and manipulation, which involves always flirting with the mullahs, the rise of a Sharia-based legal, economic, and political ideology, or the apparent freedom of jihadist parties to train madrasa graduates for attacks, not only on minorities within the country, which have suffered horribly, but especially the roster of great Satans outside it. We are the #1 great Satan, Shaitan-e-Buzurg. On another level, this course might imply a reactive post-9/11 essay on Pakistan's powerful role as a seething crucible for not only workable post-colonial politics, but also tolerable and useful forms of Islamic activism, social reform, and mystical practice. But if the historian is not careful, students might come away with an image of society that is the one portrayed in our media, namely, utterly dysfunctional and malicious, armed to the teeth, judiciously compromised, infrastructurally challenged, ensnared in moral anomie, indifferent to any form whatever of public education paid by the taxpayer, and beholden to outside economic intervention and drug smuggling for its daily survival. There is a mood running through these depressing themes, dominating the recent historiography of Pakistan. You look at the titles in the list I sent out, it's pretty depressing. Peril, pessimism, defeatism, despair. Is Pakistan a failed nation or a set of murderously hostile and mutually destructive nationalisms within a nation? Is it another Yugoslavia? Just how insufficiently has it been imagined? The current crop of texts and monographs and anthologies seem to focus on the dolorous and disastrous. But on the first day of class, and for us, this is the first day of class. Here we go. I explain that this media-driven, fear-mongering, distorted, and judgmental set of interpretations, however logically and politically appealing at this age of the so-called war on terror, is but one of several unproductive ways of seeing history. This course, by contrast, takes pains to promote the following two propositions or typologies. Number one, every citizen of Pakistan, regardless of ethnic, gender, educational, or class-based status in society, is now undergoing an intensely personal struggle to assess and prioritize the multiple nested loyalties and affinities created by the pasts of Pakistan, plural, the multiple pasts of Pakistan. Said another way, this is a struggle to engage the truer, nobler, and ultimately emancipating meaning of jihad as a spiritual, moral, and civic commitment. This is the greater jihad in the Quran, the struggle with yourself, the struggle to sort out what you are doing in this life. The lesser jihad is to take up arms to right a wrong or to repel an invasion. The real Islamic frontier is the inner frontier, the personal, spiritual, intellectual, moral one. Not any frontier in Kashmir or on the Indian or Afghan border or toward the West. It is the outcome of myriad inner jihads that will define Pakistan as a nation if they are allowed to by its political and religious institutions. Now, there are very clear historical reasons why Pakistan is the relatively lawless, patriarchal, corrupt, feudal, and nearly failed state that it has now become. It was the last major conquest of the British Empire in India in the middle of the 19th century. This empire was mature, exhausted, and fed up. It was already out of pocket. So it wished to govern Punjab, Northwest Frontier, Sindh, and Baluchistan as cheaply as possible, as easily as possible. So you leave traditional rulers in place. You leave local magnates in place. You leave clan leaders and spiritual advisors in place. Owners of great tracts of land, let them alone. You make carrot and stick top-down institutions the norm instead of a more consultative, unwieldy, and untidy forms of rule that earlier conquests in South Asia delivered to the populace, starting in Bengal and central India. Post-colonial Punjab is Asia's Wild West. The second idea about Pakistan is that their current situation as the South Asian whipping boy and adoptive home of the Taliban is very largely the fault of global historical processes impinging on Pakistani society from outside. It is doing its best to address these forces. Conveying all this is a tall order. You have to go beyond the American media. You have to go beyond the five-star hotels in Karachi and Islamabad. Very few Americans do this. Some Pakistanis themselves don't do this. They are immersed in distress. They're economically left out to dry. Their political, spiritual, and psychological serenity has been crushed, shattered, sliced, shredded over time. All they can think of is lashing out at alleged enemies. I suggest that we attempt to recast the history of Pakistan without this, without its implicit consequence of essentializing Pakistani culture as irredeemably sunk in violence, fanaticism, corruption, and oppression. In other words, my task is that of historicizing hope and appreciation rather than abandonment, judgmentalism, and fear. Now, every course on Pakistan should cover the array of implications from its role in the war on terror. This is not a plea for Pollyanna history. But we need to focus less on regimes and more on daily life, less on dangers and threats and more on people's capacities to carry on as normal human beings. To expect Pakistan to have developed a tidy, unitary identity by now is asking a very great deal of them. We USers had our defining civil war 75 years after our freedom. But theirs was 1/3 as far along. And because it split the country apart, as ours did not, it was much more devastating. We USers did not have superpowers actively, cynically, aggressively, and patronizingly manipulating our lives in their quest for global or regional dominance during our 234 years, like Pakistan has had relentlessly in its 64 years. Pakistan is a plaything. Finally, at long last, it's time for someone higher up in the U.S. to stand up and say that Pakistanis are nice people. Their hospitality, cooperativeness, warmth, equanimity, creativity, pragmatism, rationality, and patriotism shine forth throughout their seemingly endless series of political crises and nightmares. This is amazing and deserves attention in our classrooms and in our media. It will take time, but a civil society may well emerge from this mess if the world's and Pakistan's domestic bullies will calm down and let ordinary people breathe. A book called The Unbearable Lightness of Being came out in English in 1985 and soon became a feature film starring Daniel Day-Lewis and a bowler hat. It fascinated readers and viewers with its pained but existentially detached outlook during Czechoslovakia's national meltdown. Students of Pakistan's history should read it, especially the bits with the bowler hat. Milan Kundra's musings on the banality of despotism are directly applicable in one form or another to civil society's capacity to endure and to a post-colonial great power to inflict retrograde damage. I quote Milan Kundra's words, "Criminal regimes are made not by criminals, but by enthusiasts, convinced they have discovered the only road to paradise. They defended that road so valiantly that they were forced to execute many people. Later, it became clear that there was no paradise, that the enthusiasts were therefore murderers." End of quote. Is this not especially true, not only of Pakistan and South Asia, but of U.S. foreign policy and intervention, as both continue to unfold and to be written? I'm going to show you some pictures now to give you an idea and maybe a little commentary. Oh, right. Am I doing it right, Jim? Yep. The one on the... This one. Maybe I broke it when I dropped it. It hit the ground pretty hard. Some of these are you going to be okay? Some of these are self-explanatory, and I will just get out of the way so you can see them. Okay, now I got it. Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. If I stand completely out of the way and the signal works, beautiful. I've talked about this before. Up in the Northern Territories, you have some of the world's most spectacular mountains. They are a wonderful place for holidays. This is the road to China, called the Karakoram Highway. My family and I were up in this neighborhood in 1986, and we thought we were going to die because some of the roads are on cliffs. The terrain is rather much like this. This is a CIA aerial photograph with important places marked on the roadsides. The Hunza Valley is where people routinely live to be 120, 130 years old because during the winter months they eat apricots. The apricots are dried in the sun by the hundreds of thousands, and the Hunzakuts are remarkable for their really, really wonderful moods and their outlook on life, and they are the people probably epitomized in Rudyard Kipling's story, The Man Who Would Be King. The biggest mosque in Pakistan was built by the Saudis. Not surprisingly, it's called the Faisal Mosque, and it is a truly wonderful monument to piety. Interestingly, the minarets are after the Ottoman style, with cones on the top. Resorts abound in the Northern Territories. My family and I stayed in this building right here. Oops. Takes a while to warm up? Okay. Laser. I have my own laser. I can use it. But, and that white little tiny cylindrical thing over on the right is an airplane. For an extra rent, you can stay in the airplane. But there were 4 of us, and we weren't on a honeymoon, so we didn't. At festival time, some of the major shrines, like this one of Data Ganj Bakhsh in northwestern Lahore, are lit up. This is the anniversary of his death, and that is the day that is more celebrated than the anniversary of a saint's life. Why? Because it is called the Urs, the marriage of the saint to God. He goes to join God again. And he is a 12th century saint, and he is extremely popular in Lahore and all throughout South Asia. A lot of people come from abroad just to visit his tomb. When I came to visit his tomb, I saw Sufism in action. They were reciting his poetry and getting ecstatic to the place where they literally would pass out. I saw this myself with my own eyes. I wouldn't have believed it. Sufis are the more enthusiastic evangelicals of Pakistan and the Islamic world. That is the sector of society that the United States needs to cultivate and rely on in this so-called global war on terror, because democracy is not going to cut it. Nur Palace, Bahawalpur. I've written a lot on the principality, the successor state of Bahawalpur. I won't go into detail right now, but it's a wonderful, wonderful Indus Valley civilization that is based on cooperation and volunteerism and politeness, unlike Punjab. Karakoram Highway again, a road link between China and Pakistan. A lot of folks come on bicycles that are slightly overloaded, like this one. There are 3 folks on it. The main Mughal mosque. Notice the onion domes. That is characteristic of Mughal religious architecture. Shah Jahan is the same emperor who built the Taj Mahal. Saints can be male or female. This is one tomb, very, very popular, of a female saint in Sindh, that is the southernmost province of Pakistan. Her tomb is in the standard Multani style, decorated with blue Multani tile. And somewhere here, I've got a close-up of it. This is the tomb of the founder of the nation, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. K2 is shorter than Everest by about 39 feet. Pakistanis very graciously did not contest the most recent measurements, which were about 12 years ago. There is a Pakistani lorry or truck in the Smithsonian Museum in DC. This is not it. There really are a work of art. Can anybody tell me what this is? Or tell the group what this is? No. It's tent pegging. That is a peg that is driven into the ground. Tent pegging is taking a spear and running it through the peg at full speed of your horse in order to collapse your enemy's tent, so that you can neutralize your enemy and capture him without killing him. And this was a skill developed in the medieval period, and it's still practiced in Pakistan, but not in India. You all know what this is. This is the layer of henna that goes on a hand, and after a while you wash it off, and a wonderful design is left, and it stays for about 3 weeks. Minar-e-Pakistan from Badshahi Mosque. The Minar-e-Pakistan is a monument that celebrates and commemorates the Lahore Resolution of 1940 that sent the Muslim League in the direction of campaigning for an independent homeland for Muslims. Amir Khan's Mosque, it is a 17th century mosque in Lahore, downtown in the middle of the old city. It's a spectacular mosque, very well maintained. maintained, and not only that, but refurbished and repaired on a regular basis. Here is the Badshahi Mosque illuminated for a holiday. One of the largest banyan trees, or buttergud trees, in the entire world is in Jinnah Park in Lahore. We would walk by it from our house on Race View on a regular basis. There are many types of hot doggery in Pakistan. This is one of them. This gentleman is making variously lemon juice and sugarcane juice. Maybe he's combining them and making them together. But that's sugarcane in the rack on the left. The machine to grind it is behind him, or at the back end of the picture. And it is totally delicious, but extremely deadly, because the sugarcane has been crawling with flies for like 2 days. My grandmother used to say that I was a handsome little kid. This is not me, but it sort of looks like me. But this guy takes the prize. That is a harvest of cotton on its way to market. The inner entrance to Jahangir's tomb outside of Lahore. Jahangir was the father of Shah Jahan, the son of the greatest emperor of the Mughal Empire, Akbar. He was a bit of a drunkard, a bit of a drug user, and I love teaching about his regime because during the times that he was incapable, his wife ran the empire. Her name was Nur Jahan, light of the world. And she had 4 relatives who were extremely powerful in the administration. Together with her, they could have taken over when he was unconscious, but they didn't because they were Shiites. And they knew that the society would not accept them. The average cityscape, it looks like this. These are middle-class houses from an elevation point in Lahore. I think I took this picture from the Minari, Pakistan. Churches, there are plenty in Pakistan. This one was built during the British period. It is in Karachi. Bizarre types of blended hybrid architecture are present throughout South Asia. This is a British attempt to combine Gothic with Mughal. Doesn't quite work. There's a lot of joy. These guys are on the steps of the Imperial Mosque, just having a good time. The Red Fort of Lahore, famous Mughal monument, one of about 7 in South Asia. I love doors. This particular one looks both forbidding and inviting. It's a good trick if you can achieve that. Somebody with a lot of work, somebody with a lot of wisdom. Nobody I know. This is called the mihrab of the mosque in Multan. It has a lot of inscriptions from the Quran. It is the niche that faces Mecca. And all prayer is in the direction of Mecca. An upgraded and refurbished downtown building, housing maybe 6 families. This could be in any city in Pakistan. Pakistan has superhighways that are way better than ours. Ours are beat up now. Multani tile decorates just about every public building in northwestern Pakistan, near Afghanistan, but it is an indigenous product. This guy is making naan. The dough balls are on the tray behind him, and the cloth that he uses to slap them against a very hot clay oven. One is being cooked in the oven, and he is reacting to something said that was amusing. Here's another panel from Amir Khan's mosque. This guy is taking his ease. He's surrounded by his wares. He's a pottery dealer. Much of this stuff is made locally. And this seems to be another Qawwali group with microphones and candles and lots of flowers to suit the occasion. In the monsoon, you travel the best way you can. Studying the Quran in a mosque. Very common sight. Here is Shamshad Market in Lahore at sunset. Work takes place at many, many levels of society. These guys are just about in every neighborhood. Tobacco consumption is widespread. The best kind of tobacco is Virginia tobacco, but it's grown in India. Just the label. In the mountains in the wintertime or even in the fall, you can find snow and you can make stuff and have a really good time. Dancing to Qawwali, dancing to Sufi music is a form of ecstatic expression. Men do it, generally separately from women, but I went to a tomb, the Shah Jamal tomb, and he was a 17th century saint, and there were men and women dancing together. So Pakistan is not all repressed. These guys are nighttime candy and sweetmeat sellers in Karachi, and they are very popular. You can see all kinds of good stuff there. Busy city streets. Traffic almost never stops in Pakistan. Same is true with India. My sense is that this guy is above argumentation and disputation because he doesn't need to prove himself. This is Kim's gun. It's in front of the Lahore Museum, and it was the focus of the first scene in Rudyard Kipling's novel. It has not been moved since then. Kim, the novel. Lahore at sunset. So, that's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rich. Most informative and well-targeted presentation. I do have, if you'd queue up over here for your questions and answers, please. We still have some time, a little bit here for yours. I do have a couple of videos. Rich, you had mentioned the Bhutto, the epic story of Benazir Bhutto.
Yes.
And the other one was Long Live Pakistan,
Yes.
which is a documentary by Pascal Lamsch.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll get this information out to you with an email through Marcia. And I also understand that some of you need to have the suggested reading material and the other material that we'd put out in a doc form, DOC, because of the software that you use, the docx couldn't be read. So I'll see that that gets to Marcia too. Do we have any questions from the audience? Yes, please come up here. As usual. I don't know. Yeah, how are you again? Well, please come on up and please speak into the mic.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Professor Barnett. It gave us a very comprehensive overview, understanding, development, how Pakistan became what it is, etc. I have millions of questions, but maybe I can ask just one that concerns us in the West at the moment. Obviously, the so-called primacy of the American thinking of democracy doesn't work. Doesn't work in that part of the world, doesn't work in many parts of the world. But of course, in light of what you had pointed out, the madrasas that turn out like 20,000 students, I don't know, a month, a year, whatever, is an incredible threat to the rest of the world, be it little Charlottesville or anywhere else. You said the picture that we get about Pakistan in the media, be it left-wing, right-wing, center media, focuses exclusively on the shortcomings of the Pakistanis. And what you would like to see as a knowledgeable, in a way, scientist of Pakistani life is a better understanding and saying each individual has its own jihadist moments or struggle, jihadist meaning in the good way. How do you see, now let's say somebody, all of a sudden the US government says, we understand you, no more drones, we will help you in your struggle, whatever. Having painted the West as the evildoers for so long, I mean, for decades and decades, what would that accomplish? Would that not just give a free hand to the carnage of, oh, let's go after them and pay back time? Because in a way, all Westerners are bad and all Westerners are evil. I mean, I don't see where that's, I'm not in favor of drone attacks, but I don't know what one can even do about a tinderbox like Pakistan. I just don't know. And I think many people feel, even in government, I don't think they're all evildoers. There are some people who feel, if only we could do this or that and solve something. Wouldn't it have to come from the people themselves in Pakistan, from their government and their population demanding something better than what they're getting?
Question. Ask a question. Don't give a speech.
I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you. The United States cannot rescue Pakistan. Pakistan has to rescue itself. The difficulty is one of prioritization, one of resources, one of a culture of victimization. And democracy is not totally absent from Pakistan. There are elections. Some of them are rigged. Some of them are rigged here in the United States. We have to be alert and not be so quick to judge. I would say the best way of causing or bringing about the long-term change that both you and I want in Pakistan, without telling them what to do, because we really can't do that. We're too far sunk in our own neo-colonial policies, especially in Israel, is to somehow facilitate a revitalization of public education in Pakistan. Public education doesn't exist. There are schools, but they're full of squatters, and the teachers never show up, and the students, if they show up, they don't have anything to prepare themselves with. The textbooks are all jihadist, distorting just about everything that you and I understand about the world. They do have an overlayment of private schools. Some of them are even what they called convent schools. They're sort of the survivors of missionary schools back in the 19th century. Musharraf went to one. He went to Foreman Christian College in Lahore. I know the immediate past president of Foreman Christian College. He invited me to come and teach there after I retire. I'm still considering it. But education is what will be the salvation of Pakistan. Right now, you do not so much have a very high degree of illiteracy, you have a very high degree of uninformed citizenry, or badly informed citizenry. This is in spite of a free press and free media. It's not structurally sound to have no elementary and secondary education in Pakistan. But that's the reality, because the people have been so frantic to deal with challenges to their very existence that they haven't been able to recruit a bureaucracy to achieve educational benefit. As far as the madrasas are concerned, they feed on poverty. The people who send their children to madrasas are the poorest of the poor, because a madrasa will give him or her a uniform, 2 square meals a day, and a bed. They will also give them brainwashing, but at least the family will know that their child is not going to starve or to be molested in the street or to be made into a sex slave in Russia or some other horrible thing. But Pakistani has to get serious about governance because they're not serious right now.
Thank you.
I find your description and your argument very persuasive, very understandable and very persuasive. My question is, with respect to needed changes in U.S. foreign policy and with respect to changes that you would hope for in Pakistan that you've spoken of, how hopeful are you?
I fluctuate depending on circumstances, depending on who gets elected in Pakistan and what their policies seem to be. I talk to Pakistanis almost every day on the phone. I email them a lot. I read 3 Pakistani newspapers. Some of them, when I have an asylum case I have to get ready to produce, I read newspapers in Urdu as well. I have a friend who sends me clippings from their print newspapers that he gets in Lahore. It's not something I can make a valid generalization about. I'm from Missouri, so you have to show me where you are as a nation preparing to improve yourselves. Show me, take some time and take some energy. Nawaz Sharif is in there for the money. He's as corrupt as they go. I've met his brother. His brother was chief minister of the Punjab for a long time, and they've been steadily building mansions and sending money overseas since day one. But so there's a kleptocracy going on in Pakistan that has to be brought under control. Even Benazir Bhutto couldn't make much of a dent, and she was prime minister twice. So it's not a U.S. policy. Gosh, how much time do you have? Our policy is benign neglect. Our policy is to use threats and coercion to get transport from the Khyber Pass to Karachi, where we offload of all of our repatriated gear out of Afghanistan for the moment. That will not last long. That has been extremely profitable to Pakistanis because someone is on the take every step of the way. And so we can turn off that faucet, but we should turn on some expertise about the country in the inner circles of the Washington establishment. There are so many other struggles on the horizon, though, that I don't think Pakistan is a high priority for the United States. It should be because of the changes I mentioned and the threats I mentioned.
We have time for one more.
My understanding of Pakistan is limited to having read the book I Am Malala. Would you comment on that book?
Well, I will be honest with you. All I know about it is the fact that it's sitting on my bedside table, and my wife has read it, and she loved it. And it's a very personable book, written with an assistant. And this is the young woman who at age 12 was shot in broad daylight by the Taliban on her way to school. And then one of her classmates was also shot. Neither of them was killed. The shot went through her left eye and exited the left side of her neck. She went to intensive care in Birmingham, England, where they have a military hospital that is designed to treat victims or fatalities and injuries and casualties from the Afghan war. And so she survived, and now she has a wonderful career and a wonderful family, and her drumbeat is education. And her theme is that education, especially for girls, is extremely important. And so she made the mistake of saying that Obama is her hero rather than Osama bin Laden. And so the Taliban view is, well, she deserved to be shot no matter who did it. So there is that thread of violence and insurgency and viciousness in Pakistani culture now, and it's largely the result of the madrasas, I would say, but also of the prominence that the ulama have and the prominence that the mullahs of the jihad have. But Malala Yousafzai was a runner-up for the Nobel Prize. She may get it, depending on how she handles the rest of her career. Another major hero and candidate for the Nobel Prize is Greg Mortensen, who wrote 3 Cups of Tea and Stones into Schools. And it's that kind of thing that we need to promote. Education in Pakistan for girls. There is yet a third level activity organized by a very dear friend of mine, Carla Petrovich, who lives now in Austin. She was retired from Montrose University. And she is a linguist and an anthropologist, and she's a brilliant person. And she started the Hoshyar Foundation, H-O-S-H-Y-A-R. Hoshyar means aware. The Hoshyar Foundation has founded 12 schools for girls throughout Pakistan. And they go from success to success. I contribute whenever I can, whenever there's a few spare bucks in the second checking account. I wish, in conclusion, to convey a series of distinct moods and viewpoints going back centuries and plumbing several nooks and crannies of the mystical, poetic heart and mind to further drive home the point that the war on terror is not going to be won by secularism, but it will be won or lost by popular Islam, otherwise known as Sufism. These are all Sufi poets. First, from the 13th century, the Persian poet Fariduddin Attar sarcastically laments the scorn that the public seems to have for works of charity. Gar kuni bakshish guyand ki main kard na vai, gar kushi ar bade guyand ki vai kard na mai. If you give freely, they will say, it's the wine talking, not him. And if you raise hell, they will say, it's the real him. Forget the wine. Skipping to the 14th, also in the 13th century, is Saadi Shirazi, a very famous poet. This poem is inscribed in the entranceway to the United Nations building in New York City. Bani Adam awzawi ek digarand ki dar afrinish zik jawharand cha uzvi badarad awarad ruzgar digar uzvahara namanat karar. The children of Adam belong fast one to another. They form the jewel of creation. If even one should be made to suffer, her fellow creatures will never escape her pain. Moving to the 14th century, we have Hafiz-e-Shirazi from the same city 3 generations later. Notice how the cosmology of this sets the mood. Banishin bar lab ju yo guzre umr bibin ki in isharat e jahan e guzran e mara bas. Take your seat on the banks of the sparkling brook and behold time itself. It is nothing if not a vision of our transient, ephemeral world. In the 18th century, we moved to the headquarters of Urdu poetry, passing from Persian, which was the governmental and cultural language of South Asia for 700 years, to its successor lingua franca, namely Urdu. And the poet in Lucknow, Mir Taghi Mir, was capable of uplifting themes, sometimes as if addressed to his own immortality. It applies to us too, of course. Kha ka patla hai Adam jo koi achi kahe, आलम खाक में बरसों ताएं वो बात रहे. Man was first made of clay, and if the song you sing is good, this world of clay, for years to come, will listen to your voice. Moving to the 19th century, we have a reflection on life and death from Sheikh Ibrahim Zauq, also of Lucknow. Laye hayat qaza le chale chali, apni khushi na aaye na apni khushi chale. Life brought us, we came. Death took us, we went. We neither came at will nor went at will. And finally, we have a challenge thrown down by Mir Taqi Mir, again from Lucknow. Kahin kya jo puche koi humse Mir, jahan mein tum aaye the, kya kar chale? What should I say if anyone should ask me, what did you do while you were in the world?
Thank you very much, Rick. We really appreciate it. Most generous. Thank you.
सहेलियां